Let's get going. Everyone, look at the review list. So, everyone get the review list. I have 10 multiple choice. There'll be 10 multiple choice questions and probably 10, 8, something like that, matching. There'll be one short ID, probably. I'll decide tomorrow I'll do one more, but I think one. And then you have to do the boom bust. Do the trot. Put the basic elements on there. And I'll kind of review again on Thursday what exactly I'm looking for, but it should take about 25 minutes. Tomorrow we have an assembly for PEP. So you guys can be a little bit overwhelmed with PEP. Hopefully it won't last all the way through Friday, but we'll see how that will affect your test. Yes. Yeah, deflationary inflation. That you have to have. But inflationary, inflation. Yep. And what else? So I put some asterisks on the ones that I'm kind of looking at for potential short IDs. I'll give you a couple choices, but yeah. And one we're going to get to in the next couple days. Sound good? All right. Next. Something up here. PepsiCo. One of the big holding companies that has everything from Lay's potato chip to Pepsi to Taco Bell. What are they doing to all their prices? Even though they just announced it this morning. They're cutting them by 50%. Why are they cutting the price of the Doritos? 15%. I mean that. Hey, let's look at the boom bust cycle. Now it's time to use knowledge to practical matters. What do they think we're at? They drop prices by 50%. What do they think is happening? Huh? They're here. They think we're here. They think we're on the edge of recession. And so they're desperately trying to sell. They were raising prices pretty consistently because they thought, well, people still have enough money to buy Lay's potato chips. Well, they're not buying it. So they think they're near a recession. These are little things you kind of pick out. So, oh, wait, they're cutting prices. That's a cutback. That's a cutback. They think they're not going to make as much money as they thought. Now, does that mean we're in this right here? Not 100%. It just tells you they're very, very scared. We're in unprecedented economic times. Things are happening that never really happened, like with bond prices, all kinds of things. So that's where we're at. Yeah.
Are you gonna post a picture of it?
Maybe. You guys do really good copies of them. Yeah. You're all very talented artists. We'll see if I remember. I'll have to remind me again. I'll try to get one up by Thursday. How about that? Okay. It'll be a picture of that. Yeah, I don't have. It's up here. Okay. So. Remember the Knights of Labor cooperative system? We did this yesterday, right? So this one, they're talking about changing the system. And then how far did we get to the American Federation of Labor? Did we get anything past this? So let's get to the American Federation of Labor. So they were craft unions. All men, almost all white men, they did not want. In fact, were very hostile towards women or anybody who was not white and certain types of immigrants. But don't forget, we've already talked about what made somebody white. To their point, to many Americans' point of view, Italian was not white. That was a different race. I'll tell you about the big debates about what was white when we get to 1924. But they accepted the wage system, but they called it bread and butter. Basically, we want a bigger piece of the pie. Just better wages, a little bit better wages, a little better working conditions, issues like that. Yes, we want to get rid of child labor, but we're not going to change the system. We want a greater voice, but not a cooperative system. So They might want some of the same things as the socialists and the Knights of Labor, but not exactly the same. But they did believe in collective bargaining. They believed in direct action, embargoes, which is called not crossing the picket line. Embargo companies that are being struck at, or locking their workers out. I'll explain that in a second. They wanted more direct action. The Knights were timid. Thank you for this. Oh, beautiful. Oh, you like my picture of boxcars? Box car. You want me to take a picture of this and post it? Yeah, I don't like show up my own though. I know you guys will sell it on the black market, but that is why the 30 years before the turn of the century, over 24,000 strikes, and some were incredibly violent, and 99% of the violence was by either thugs hired by the company or police, National Guard operating for the company. Governments were almost universally against labor unions. And these are strikers in New York City. And you'll notice by their signs, immigrants. Some of the lowest paid jobs, these are in the garment industry. So you see Italian, you see Hebrew, yes. Bread and butter are just like better wages, better conditions. We're not trying to change the world. We just want a better one. Yes. Collective bargaining, that's where the union bargains a contract for all workers. So it's not an individual worker bargaining. The union will negotiate a contract for all the workers. I am on a collective bargaining agreement. My contract, like all teachers, we have a pay scale. And at least for the first years, it goes up every year a certain amount, and then we all have a certain amount. But we all have a contract. And those who need negotiating again. I did it a while ago. So there are a couple events we have to cover. There are many strikes. We'll pick out a few here and there. But one of the most famous events is called the Haymarket Effect. And this will show the powers arranged against labor unions. There was a plan for a general strike. So workers would not show up on May 1st, 1886, demanding an 8-hour workday. So they're going to take a day off from work and risk being fired to demand this. When it was proposed, the Knights were completely against it. They thought this was too confrontational and they would get blamed. They wanted arbitration. I mean, they really were timid. The AFL wanted it. So there was a fight. So, but even with the Knights being opposed, over 1 million workers came out, including lots of members of the Knights. So these are the people striking in Chicago. And look at the thousands of other people lining the streets in their support for an 8-hour working day. In a number of different places, police surrounded them, especially in Chicago, and attacked. In a couple of spots in Chicago, in downtown Chicago, peaceful marchers for an 8-hour working day were attacked by police with their day sticks. So, somebody might know what a nightstick is. Heard of a nightstick? A club that police officers carry about that big. Now, today they have a little club, but now it's retractable. Back then it was like a slot. A day stick is about that big. And they put them in locked boxes. How some of see a bit. And so if you ever see like riot police today, they have these big clubs. They waited in and beat the hell out of it. And of course, people would fight back and it would escalate. And at least 7 people would be killed. Almost all peaceful marchers. These were very peaceful. But on May 4th, in response to this, workers demanded a day-long rally that would end with speeches all over against police violence. And most famously at Haymarket Square in Chicago. Big open square in Chicago. You still go there. It's really pretty. It's near the downtown. It's relatively close to the lake. Of course, it's Chicago 1886. So by then, you're close to the lake. It might be pretty, but everything in the entire town smells like the New York. Remember I told you about all the cattle coming, they're literally just starting. And you can see the impact of immigrants here too, can't you? And in Germany. They would go in places with little Germany, little Italy, little Deutschland, little Munich. They had all the little areas where immigrants would live. Well, Haymarket Square would be the most famous one. And people brought, this was going to be on a Sunday, one of the few days of the week, one of the only days that workers usually did not work. And they would bring their families. It was going to be really a show of peace. Now, there would be some people who might have wanted more. Some of them were actually paid off by companies to do damage. They would give an excuse to attack them. And they're going to be surrounded by the police. And there would be speeches, number of things going on. But think about this image of this kind of combination, workers' rally and picnic. But there's a group of police officers huddled together near the Haymarket Square, and somebody rolled a round little cartoonish bomb with a wooden fuse into the police. Yeah.
So workers,
Basically, yeah.
so what's like having Saturdays off as well, like 8 hours?
Not,
Totally different.
it was, a way to look at it would be related. Once we get in our work day, okay, let's reduce it to a 5-day work. And so our concept of work of a weekend would be won by labor unions. That'd be a big fight. So, yeah, related. But it was like one step at a time. So 8 police officers would be killed by this bomb. Little black powder bomb, but it's rough. Basically, just imagine an iron casing with black powder in the middle. When the wood burned down, it exploded. It's a trap. They didn't have done a little bit too volatile and expensive. To this day, we're not exactly sure who did it. We're not exactly sure. But immediately, remember, bomb throwing anarchists. They arrested 7 anarchists. 7 anarchists would be arrested and blamed for this. Their only evidence is that they were anarchists. And there might have been a couple of them that were planning bombings of factories when they were closed at night as part of this revolutionary terrorism. But they had no evidence they rolled the bomb in, but they're going to be convicted. But the big thing is this. Okay, anarchists, not very many anarchists. But then they said the anarchists are connected to and part of which labor union? Okay, those who are capitalists and believe in conservative economics. Or more laissez-faire economics is called conservative. We talked a little bit about that yesterday. We'll learn more detail down the road. They don't know labor unions at all. Despise labor unions. But if there's going to be a labor union, would they rather have the Knights of Labor or the AFL? So, anarchists who are connected to the Knights of Labor and would use this to discredit the Knights by saying they're a bunch of bomb-throwing anarchists. And the media, okay, what's the mass media at that time? Hundreds of newspapers in every major town. New York City had over 100 daily newspapers. Chicago had over 80. Helena had 4. Helena was a tiny little town in 1886. People read a lot more than people today. And there were newspapers and reporters. It had already started what's going to become the Associated Press, which are reporters. Then they could report national issues, then send it to local newspapers. So news could spread. There were, as a percentage of the population, significantly more newspapers and more reporters reporting the news than today. We don't have very many reporters. There's almost no local ones. Halifax virtually nothing. There's almost no local news in Halifax. It seems like there's a lot because if you get on the phone and look up news, you get a lot of news. But it's usually the same stuff circled around. Didn't you? Get updates from the New York Times. The newest release of the so-called Jeffrey Epstein files are shocking. Absolutely shocking. Shocking. And they're and they're redacting some, they're so very popular. And they appear to be incompetent at the Department of Justice. They put out a bunch of young women, younger than you, who are being abused. They put out pictures of their face and some of them nude. They released them. All women. Let alone all the men, rich men involved. That's another story. Speaking of media. So I got that from the New York Times. To read more. And the stock market's crashing. Now it's just going down. So the media spread the narrative because most of the big newspapers were owned by people who are relatively conservative economic, and they hate labor unions. So what did they say? The Knights of Labor are a bunch of anarchists. Here you get cartoons of anarchist meeting on the lakefront. And these are some of the anarchists they arrested. No evidence at all. They just drew this drawing of the peaceful anti-police violence one. And look at this one. Here's their picture of the Haymarket Affair. Notice the beard, crazy eyes, the explosion in the background. Not at all the way it happened. By the way, think how important the media narrative is. This is now spread throughout, now with the Telegraph, all the way from Helena has newspapers now. Little town of Helena. Remember, this is only 3 years before Montana became a state. What the heck do people in Helena, Montana in 1886 know about Chicago? Or for that matter, even down in Peoria, Illinois. Little bits and pieces, right? Well, that's it today. Get little bits and pieces. So what do we know? A bomb exploded. Oh, it was anarchists. It says right here in the newspaper. But the anarchists are connected to the building. The Knights. What happened to the Knights? Just question the Knights. This destroyed the Knights. And showed how important the media narrative is. If you can get what you want out first, you can control what people. Not everybody, but you don't need everybody. You just need enough. And most people are doing what? Working on small. So they get little bits of information. The media has great amounts of power. So, bomb throwing anarchists were responsible, and 4 with virtually no evidence at all would be arrested. Here's a mock-up of what the bomb would have looked like. You notice the wooden fuse. We still don't know. But certainly it was not the Knights of Labor, who didn't even want the march in the first place. But this is going to have great impact all around the world. People trying to start labor unions, and we're connected to moderate socialists and others all over Europe. The next year on May 1st, had massive rallies all over Europe and the United States, but all over Europe. And the next year, Europe on May 1st, and May 1st, and May 1st. And soon, workers in Europe are going to demand another day off. And they're going to get what's called a Labor Day. And their Labor Day will be on May 1st. To knock American workers demanded a day off too. But they didn't want basically more conservative economically, Democrats and Republicans didn't want to get labor unions victory. So they didn't make our Labor Day on May 1st. It's our Labor Day in the United States. It's kind of lots of meaning now, even though we have no mandate on day off in America. People have some of it. No one knows what Labor Day is? Well, I guess you won't get the 3-day weekend on the first May after the first Monday after the first Sunday in September. You're not going to get that 3-day weekend. We're going to have class. That's Labor Day. First Monday after the first Sunday. So thank you. That sound familiar now? Now, but I should be clear. It doesn't have to be paid. The U.S. has no pay, mandatory pay politics, but we have politics. But you don't pay for politics. You go to Germany, they got like 20 hours. And 5 weeks mandatory paid vacation. even more and more. But this would lead to, remember that's why I showed you the pictures of immigrants. Once again, this would fuel nativism, radical immigrants, foreigners or others. They're not like real Americans. And I didn't mean to show this picture again, and I left it on there. I was going to take it off. But this is a really famous cartoon from Puck magazine. Here's poor Uncle Sam and looking at all the immigrants. And it's hard to see, but we got socialists and criminals, including the idea was that many Italian immigrants were criminals. In the 1890s, there was a belief that an organized crime syndicate from Sicily was infiltrating the United States. Can you see it on the cartoon? The mafia. Have you heard of the mafia? And so there's going to be a real idea that these immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe were either radicals or criminals. And you start reading stories by the 1890s that they're emptying out the prisons to letting all of these immigrants in to commit crimes in the United States. And there'll be a lot of anti-Italian bias, saying they're criminals or radical anarchists. They said that in the 1840s about Irish immigrants. They would say it again in the 1920s. If you listen carefully, even though it's hard to get news today, guess what they're saying today? Have been saying for years. That they're emptying out prisons today. That is being said by natives. So the point is, it's happened before. People have said it before. And it was just as untrue now as then, because immigrants actually commit significantly fewer percentage of crimes than native Americans. Not because they're less likely, it's not better. They don't want to be put down. So there's a logic to it. So, but this we use it as credit unions. Unions are a bunch of firms. So and you can see this leading right into the Red Scare. A bunch of foreigners coming in. These dangerous people from other countries, dangerous aliens from other countries. And if we allow them in, they'll bring their radical ideas. And that gave me an excuse to show 3 propaganda posters of who is this really great? Yeah, Joseph Stalin. We will get to Stalin. And then that reminded me of how people misuse all these terms all the time. I thought this was amusing from 2021, which, by the way, whenever pandemics happen in world history, people lose their mind. Just absolutely lose their mind. And people lost their mind. And part of it I understand because it's scary, but every time. But back to this. I just thought she was really funny. It's communism, social dissidence. Anybody want to know what the sign underneath is? Are you ready? Same exact person, defy fascism, defy the fascist lockdown. Different ends. And it just goes to show you that once you start using these terms to attack people, people don't know what the heck they mean anymore. So, how would they attack labor unions? Well, intimidation is the big one. One of the most common ways, what we've done time after time, and happens all the time, from everything from steel mills, it just was going on at an armor meatpacking plant, and happens all the time with professional sports, a lockout, where you close your factory to force the union to quit. So basically, you risk a short-term production loss to make the unions give up. Make the unions either break up or give in to your demands. This happens a lot. It'll be called a strike, but it's not really a strike. And then, strike breakers. Unions will call them scabs. Scabs will be brought in. Scabs will be brought in to get the factory going. Now, let's say if it's steel, you bring in strike breakers, scabs, then they're not going to be as productive. But the whole idea is to get enough production going on to show that a strike or the lockout will work or not work, and then terrify the workers saying, see, you already hired to replace it. You're done. And there's something else, to remember what kind of troops they would use during the Great Railroad trial, starting to put black workers to put down white, or black soldiers to put down white workers. What they do here, same deal. If they're trying to lock out white workers, they'll bring in black scouts or immigrants. Same deal, use nativists to divide. It happened very famously in Butte. Another one would be a yellow dog contract. The yellow dog's cowards, this is what unions call contracts that they force workers to sign and say they won't join a union. Yellow dog contracts. You won't join a union because they're scared of labor unions. Walmart kind of does this. I always forgot about lockout. Walmart's famous for lockouts. Walmart is rabidly anti-union. Rabid. They despise unions so much that it's. I'll give you an idea how much they hate labor unions. This has happened over 20 times that workers inside one Walmart voted to unionize, to join a union. And Walmart did not just do a lockout. They shut the store down and raised it, tore it down. And most of those cases built a new store across the street that would not happen. They'll take the loss rather than allow unions to. If you work at Walmart, they give you lots of anti-union. Blacklists. So blacklists are people that troublemakers, AKA, want to start a union. They'll put this list out to every alike industry and say, don't hire them, they're bad ones. Don't hire them. Blacklists can be used a lot, basically just saying you can't hire them. Now, technically, blacklists are illegal in Montana, but it can still happen. They're not illegal in a lot of states. Most famously, the most famous blacklist in American history would be during the Second Red Scare in the 1950s, where actors were accused of being communists and put on a blacklist. Actors, screenwriters, directors, and not allowed to work again. And it happens a lot. Next, Pinkertons. We mentioned Pinkertons once before, way back in the Civil War. That's William Pinkerton, the guy who did the spying for General McClellan back in 1862. He was incompetent. But Pinkertons and other detective agencies were hired to become spies. And they will work in a factory, work in a mine for a while to find out they're starting a union. Most famously, the Pinkertons would be used to spy on a group of miners trying to start a union called the Molly Maguires in Pennsylvania. And they spied on them to be able to fire all the people wanting to start a union to break the union. So they use spies to break in. And they would hang out at places where workers felt they could talk. And just in the 20th century till today, they would begin to fire them. Thugs. And where's the one place where workers feel safe? That's now, good idea about the bars, but this is actually in the workplace. A couple people said bathrooms, I heard it, yeah. So they would hang out in the bathrooms and then begin the wiretap. Amazon has been caught many times wiretapping bathrooms. Many times. To listen if the workers want to start. Amazon is rapidly. Yeah, I know, besides the EU factor, I mean, think about all you have to do is get caught wiretapping once. They knew. Then do people talk? Do you think there's a chance you'd be wiretapped? You talk? Nothing. So maybe more different. And then the other thing would be thugs. They just hire a bunch of brutes. Pinkertons would make most of their money hiring thugs to go beat up people who want to start it. Ford would be famous for hiring them. Ford Automotive. Company towns would be another way to break workers. And basically, script is company money. They wouldn't pay you in currency. They pay you in money. It's technically not money, but it's like a check that can only be used in the company store and pay your rent. And then they say, okay, you can work here, but we're going to pay you this. That means you can only live in our rentals because we're the only ones taking the rent, the script. And you must buy for our company store. And so what an effective way to raise wages. To cut wages. To cut wages. You can keep wages the same, but then raise prices in the company store. Because the company owns the store and they pay you in the script that the company uses. Has anyone ever hung around Anaconda? A better question is, who hasn't hung around Anaconda, right? Right? Has anyone been in Anaconda and ever looked at a bunch of little houses there? One side of town, there's all these little tiny white houses. I mean, they're little tiny houses. That was the remnants of the company town from the Anaconda property. And they had a company store, and all the workers had to work there. And all they had to do, if somebody wanted to start a union, kick them out of it. So, and then the most common propaganda. Unions are going to lead to, they'll take your money through union dues. They're radicalized, they're bomb-throwing anarchists. Here, Uncle Sam, talking to a laborer, basically saying, don't go slipping away to the anarchists. You know, those bombs. Job at Walmart, they'll make you watch anti-union propaganda. All. Technically, it's illegal, but no one enforces. So, anti-union intimidation. And that leads us to the most famous example of this. Everyone calls it a strike. I'm going to call it a strike, even though it's not really a strike. But I'm calling it that just because they call it. It's a walkout. Homestead Steel. That was part of Carnegie Steel. Now, Carnegie was already giving up some of his control to Henry Clay Frick. Frick was one of the most famous robber barons known for his ruthless tactics. And Carnegie left him there. Frick is going to become incredibly rich and become a really famous art collector. If you get a chance to go to New York City, go to the Henry Clay Frick house, his mansion near Central Park. Well, you have to pay, but at least all this incredible art that he collected, at least you get a look at it. It's absolutely remarkable. But back to this. Frick was going to break the union. Carnegie was just as ruthless. But remember the Gospel of Wealth? He wanted to appear like he was giving back and wanted to distance himself from some of the most aggressive tactics to break unions. And so he and Frick organized how they're going to destroy the union at Homestead, and then Carnegie would go to Scotland. It's where he immigrated from, and do this goodwill tour and talk about, I'm going to provide public education for all the Scottish children, distancing himself from the violence that's going to happen. Then Frick, who had no problem with it, would do it. So there was a union there. The only union in Carnegie Steel was called the Amalgamated Steelworkers Union. And what was the plan? They would do a lockout, break the union. So they had the men work exceedingly long hours. This is pre-overtime. Exceedingly long hours, build up a surplus of steel, and then they shut the factory down, telling workers, quit the union or starve. That's your choices. We're shutting the factory down. So we're going to take a short-term loss because Carnegie didn't want the union to spread down to places. And he had a lot of other companies supporting him. And then he hired a bunch of patrons to put barbed wire fences, all heavily armed, with repeating rifles and a brand new weapon that was really expensive. They bought a couple Maxim guns. Has anyone ever heard of a Maxim gun? It's the first machine guns. First actual, what we would call a machine gun, about 200 rounds a minute. They jammed all the time, but he bought a couple of those. And then lock out the union, and if they don't immediately give in, bring in scabs, strike breakers. And the plan was they would bring them in on the Allegheny River. So there was a river access to the factory, which was kind of necessary back in that era. And they were going to bring them in. Here's one picture, here's another picture of the fight. And protected by patrons. But union members met them, and there was a shootout. 17 people were killed. Bloody fight. And the patrons, absolutely, they just ran. A big victory for the union. Now, public opinion most workers, kind of like what happened in 1877. People all over the United States heard about this and they're like, this could happen to me. They're trying to gouge a few more cents out of these workers and make their life even more miserable. Public sympathy was with the workers. The governor of Pennsylvania, Governor Allgall, was even refused to send in the troops, which Frick couldn't believe. And Frick would go around saying, I paid for you. I bought you. You're supposed to do what I want. He said, no, I want to be reelected. But then, remember anarchists? Anarchists believing in individual acts of terrorism. And anarchists decided it was the perfect time to assassinate Frick. I don't know why I just wrote Frick, but you can add the assassinate. You know, he didn't kill him, but attacked him with a knife. Frick was able to fight off the attack, but public opinion turned. You can imagine it went from workers just like us to bomb-throwing anarchists. And once that happened, it gave cover now. Good. Next time not, okay? Oh, sorry. But then to send in troops, and the strike was split up. It wasn't a strike. Sure, just to tell you something. All right. They put down the strike. Hey, what happened to all the workers who wanted to start a union? Some were arrested and the rest were what? What is the term for not going to hire you? They're blacklisted. And after breaking the union and then cut the pay by 20%, that's when Carnegie built the office. So you see this called the Homestead Strike. I'm calling it this, even though it's not correct, just because this is the kind of thing that might be on the AP exam, you know, these kind of terminology, but it's not really a strike. But that will be an example. We'll get to another one in a little bit called the Carnivals of Revenge, what they call them. Capital versus labor. Some of the most violent fights between the workers and businesses that happen anywhere in the world happen here in the United States. And it's going to be bitterly divided. And don't forget, the United States, yes, we still have yes, there is still a large rural population who see themselves as radically different than industrial workers. So there is a divide. And you'll notice unionism and Americanism, but also abolish slavery. They're talking about wage slaves, and you'll notice the Jewish immigrants. The government was radically anti-union until Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. For the Democratic Party, which was all over the place, it's going to become more of the pro-union party, at least outside the South, and will be pro-labor union. Part of the reason was that Roosevelt wanted to raise wages to increase demand. Remember, I told you about supply and demand yesterday? And so the height of labor activity would be from the 30s to the 70s. We'll come back to this, obviously. But beginning in the 1980s, the country became very conservative. Conservative is anti-union, which we still are today. Not everybody, but as an overall Montana state government, the national government, very conservative and anti-union. So I think I didn't put enough arrows there. But this blue line right here shows the share of the American public laborers in the union. And you see the big increase. And then it begins to crash in the 80s. Now it's less than 8% of workers. And I just put these other charts. I thought this was really interesting. This is the share, the red line is the share of income for the top 10%. And look what happened to the share of income for the top 10%, meaning more money to workers, went down. Then what happened began to go up. Now, we could say that's a good thing or bad thing, but there is a direct causal relationship. So we have issues in the factory, and we have issues of working conditions. And real inequalities were forming. We have monopolies. I mean, there's a lot. Oh, and then there are anarchists. And there is a growing socialist party. And there's a real feeling that revolution might happen. And that's where we have to get now to the politics of this era. Gilded Age politics and the growth of populism. Mark Twain quoted this as the Gilded. And it's a twofold meaning. Have you ever seen something that's like gilded with gold? Covered with like a gold cover to make it look really rich, like it's solid gold, but it's not solid gold. And if you pull the gold back, what is it? Well, in this context, it's hiding what's might be blowing up the country, containing the country. Mark Twain also made fun of this new rich, the new wealth that's happening, and they were all buying all these gold gilded things to act to be really gaudy and show off their wealth. And he saw that as just easily. So, populism. Populism is misused all the time today, but it's a reform for ordinary people. I'll put it in quotes because to find ordinary. But these are people who feel ignored by the political process. And they don't have a voice. They figure the elite. Now, the elite could be the very wealthy. Some populists, it could be the educated elite. Some could be both. And you'll see elements of it then. And you'll get a lot of the a lot of elite politicians act like ordinary people to take advantage of anti-elite sentiment. Happens all the time. Incredibly wealthy people, but then they try to act like. Remember William Henry Harrison, the Block Cabin campaign? Remember way back when? He's trying to act like Andrew Jackson. Well, we see this through this day. My personal favorite in 2000, George W. Bush running for president from an incredibly wealthy, old wealth family. They bought a ranch so he could act like Albert. Go on the ranch with the chainsaw, stuff like that. They show him that. Oh, grew up in a mansion. But they acted like Albert Log Cabin. Does it happen today? Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, they want to reform capitalism. They like elements of capitalism. But they thought we have to reform it. Now, once again, what does reform mean? That could be up into interpretation. But they said, if we don't reform the capitalism, something bad will happen. So let's get the Gilded Age politics. So this era, 1870s, 1880s, all the way based to World War I. I should have people all the time just seem refer to this as the New Gilded Age. All the time. All the time. So we have a split government that I spelled spit. So a lot of people were spitting on the government. It was split. No party had control. Should I leave it as, should I add an L or just leave it as? What do you like? You like spit? I don't particularly like spit. Hey, do you guys know we have an assembly for PEP tomorrow? PEP already rising. So there's a number of times where almost never did you have a situation where the president and both houses of Congress control the same party. Almost never. And so you're going to have very weak governments. And unlike today, the power of the Congress was up and the power of the presidents were down. Weak, ineffective, kind of boring presidents. Really kind of non-entities. Even Uncle Grover Cleveland was a non-entity. Uncle Grover. Uncle Grover. So, both the Democrats and Republicans were basically laissez-faire at the leadership position. Now, if you went to local level Democrats, especially in the North, they're saying we need to protect farmers or workers, but not the national level, especially because Southern Democrats, remember that by 1890, there's only Southern Democrats, there's no Republicans in the South. They're like, we want no government action so we can keep Jim Crow and that situation we have in the South going. So, there's political corruption at all levels. Especially in the city machines were the political parties that ran the machine or ran city government. So even though voting levels, 70 to 80% of the eligible voters voted, the parties were kind of, there were like fights between Democrats and Republicans, but they really didn't stand for anything significantly different. So, looking back at it, I jumped the gun here, but people were thinking something big was going to happen. They talked about a revolution coming. And the thought was it would be a revolution of workers versus capital, but it wasn't. It was on the farm where the revolution took place in the United States because they felt they had no political representation. Both major parties did not respond to them. And more small farmers, and this would be echoed by workers, would be saying, you got to reform capitalism or else revolution. And they talked about the revolution as an Armageddon all the time. And it wasn't just in the United States. It was just this feeling that Armageddon's coming. And it's going to be a horrible revolution between the haves and the have-nots, between the upper class and everybody else. And it's going to be bloody and brutal. And they talked about it always. By the way, Armageddon would come. Wouldn't it? It just wasn't the class conflict they thought it would be World War I. They just didn't know how it would come. So, what were the agrarian problems? The biggest agrarian problem was debt. We've already mentioned farmers in debt. We talked about hard is getting debt. We talked about that before. So the debt problem is still there. So every problem that the farmers have relates back to debt. All it takes is one bad year. So what were some of the problems? Well, one of the biggies is overproduction. More land was put under the plow. So after the Civil War, land that wasn't plowed up was quickly plowed up because of the economic disaster in the South after the war. But then think about all this land open up to agriculture. You can see by the 1890s, some of the best wheat producing area in the United States, right here, that was just open up underneath. So more and more land under the plow, which I should add would help contribute to cheap exports to Europe, which led to farmers losing their farm in Europe and coming to the United States as immigrants. All of this is connected. Overproduction. So tomorrow we will pick this up. The test will be Friday. I'm looking at 10 math multiple choice. About 10 little math. You know what we do that, right? I want everyone to do really well on this thing. I was going to do one really big test, but then I realized that that's it. You just want to do it 2 days. 2 days of just straight with this. How would it read the final temperature? It's great. That's one thing. For those of you who go to college, you'd be shocked how cheap that is. They're big. What is the best? Hi, everybody. Right when you find work. Yeah, you're a big guy. Yep, only one handle. One handle. So only one. Use it.
Oh.
Stuff you have.
Lots.
There are big bricks.
Yes. Needs to.
Oh, we got too many. Not too much. Have a lot too.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow.